Good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Giannone, and on behalf of Dick Wagner and everyone else at the Crest Network, I'd like to thank you for joining us and welcome you to our weekly webinar. Today's webinar is entitled In Search of the Perfect Water Damage Project. What I'd like to do today is just to go over some myths and realities about your typical water damage and some psychology that you as an owner or you as a worker can employ to try to find that perfect water damage project. It was just perfect. Tens all around. How many of us have ever said this about any water damage project that we've worked? I would venture to say that there have been times when we thought we were pretty close. We may have left a job and invoiced it and got paid right away and said to ourselves, this is really great. I wish every job was like this. But can we honestly say that we've walked off a job 7, 10 days later, gotten paid and said to ourselves, wow, that was just perfect? More than likely, we've probably said the exact opposite many, many, many more times. What the, what is happening out there? Constant problems, issues, scope changes, customer difficulties, problems with documentation, problems with our staffs, collection issues. All of those things are a regular part of our lives. So when we're in search of the perfect water damage project, we really have to ask ourselves, number one, is it out there? Number two, what does it look like? And number three, how far away are we from being able to find it? Now, for some of us in the industry, we might look at a water damage project perfection as being like the Loch Ness Monster. We've heard stories about it, but we've never actually seen it ourselves. There's no proof or evidence of it. We just heard anecdotal stories. And you know what? In the 11 years I've been in this industry, helping hundreds of restorers with thousands of projects, I can honestly tell you, I've yet to come across it as well. But it doesn't mean it's not out there. It just means we have to find a way to stoke our vision. We all want to be here. We all want to be right in the bullseye in perfection. That's our goal on every job. That's our goal no matter what business we're in. Many of you know I came from Wall Street and I worked there for many, many years. And in the decades of time that I spent there was always the desire for that perfect trade. Many of you have heard the expression buy low and sell high. Well, that is a obviously very simplistic catchphrase for how to make money. You clearly want to buy it lower than you sell it, and you make the difference as your profit. But the real phrase really is buy lower than you sell or sell higher than you buy. There's nobody who ever buys the quote unquote dead bottom of a market, and nobody ever sells at the exact top. That would be the perfect trade. Now, I could tell you in the hundreds of thousands of trades I executed, each one I strove for perfection, but it doesn't mean that I got there. So we all want to be right in the center of the bullseye. The question is, where are you right now? That's going to tell us a lot about our perspective, our goals, and how we approach this concept of finding the perfect water damage project. Are you here where you're pretty close and you just need a little tweaking? Is that your company? Do you have your processes down really well? Do you have really good personnel and staff and you're just missing here and there one or two small things? Well, if you are, then you can use perfection as a good guideline and a good tool, and you can try your best to keep training and working towards that. Chances are most of us are probably here in the red. We're not so bad. We're not so great. We're kind of just middling it out. We could definitely do better. We're being honest with ourselves that we do have issues. Some of them might be structural. Some of them might be personnel. All issues are important. There are many different pieces to our company, and we need to have them all moving in the same direction, working at peak capacity, and working together. Think of it like the inside of a watch, tons of little moving parts. And if any one little piece gets out of sync, the whole watch stops. That's what our companies are like. and we could definitely do better is probably where most of us stand right now. Hopefully, if you're a Crust member, you're not out here in the blue where you're saying, I need a lot of help. Hopefully, you're somewhere in that red area. But if you are in the blue, the most important thing, like they say about everything, is the first step is to admit it to yourself, to be honest about your shortcomings. And if you do need a lot of help, then obviously there are ways to get yourself from the blue into the red and then ultimately into the yellow. Now, remember, guys, it's very important to understand to make a jump from blue to yellow, or better yet, to try to make a jump from blue to the bullseye, is impossible to achieve. That is not something that's realistic. And we have to remember the motto that we all need to live by right now. Where you are today will determine where you are headed tomorrow. You need to first take an assessment of yourself. The most important step is the self-reflection. I can't tell you how much it is rewarding when Dick and I go into companies who ask us to come in and help them evaluate their current position, because we are objective observers. You as owners, or you even if you work for a company, you have a vested interest. And I'm not saying you're tipping the scales or putting your finger on the scales, but it's natural instinct to want to paint yourself a rosier picture of reality than what it truly is. It's a very, very difficult thing sometimes for an owner to look at their own company in a 100% objective mode. Many times it takes an outsider, and I'm not saying someone to come in and beat you up, but I'm saying someone to give you a real true sense of reality. What I'm really interested in finding out when I do talk with owners is I first want to get their view on the strong points of their company and the weak points. Then I do my own independent analysis to see just how close those owners are with their thoughts and feelings. Many times I'm surprised to find out that they are being brutally honest and they're really, really close. And you know what? Those guys are the easiest to work with going forward because they're open to criticism from others because they're willing to criticize themselves. When I get called into companies and they say, well, all I want to do is just get bigger because everything's working great. I just want to be a bigger version of myself. I'm always very hesitant to move forward right away with clients like that because it's very, very difficult. If a client thinks that they have nothing wrong, it's very difficult to work with them on tweaking some of the things that could be improved. So, guys, the most important aspect is know where you are today so that we can determine where you're going tomorrow. If you look at the sign, there are 5 different street signs, quote unquote, on this pole. And you need to determine which one of those are you. If you're good, you can't jump right to perfect. If you're good, you should be jumping to better. Obviously, better jumps to best, best to excellent, and excellent to perfect. So in that search to get to that bullseye, in that search to get to perfection, the best place to start is by deciding where we are and knowing that we can't make giant leaps. We have to make incremental steps. So in search of that perfect water damage job, it's not out there for most of us because most of us are not at that excellent stage to begin with. To be fair, most of us are probably in the better or best stage, especially Crust members because they've already taken the step to address some of their issues. And God willing, they've gotten enough input and support from us that they've been able to move out of the good stage into the better or the best stages. Remember, guys, for most of us, we need to focus on progress, not perfection. Progress is what makes us better today than we were yesterday. Progress is what will make us better tomorrow. Perfection for just about all of us is going to be a goal that's going to hurt us. It's going to damage our ability to get better. So obviously there's an expression out there that's applicable to owners. It's applicable to salesmen. It's applicable to marketers. It's applicable to basically everybody in our lives, whether it's work, whether it's our relationships, whether it's our marriages. And that phrase is this: don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I'm going to take a moment here. I'm going to read something to you guys. It comes from the Harvard Business Review. And it's a little wordy, so I didn't want to put it on a slide, but it really is very impactful when you think about how we go about our everyday lives, both in social settings and in our business lives. And I really want to take the time to read this. It was published earlier this year in the Harvard Business Review, and it's entitled, believe it or not, Don't Let Perfect Be the Enemy of Good. And it reads as follows. We should all strive to do our best, but if you always aim for perfection, you may blow deadlines, annoy your colleagues, and miss out on opportunities. Instead of never being satisfied with good enough, talk to others about their standards. What does a good job look like to your boss, peer, or client? Seek their feedback on expected results, costs, and timelines rather than trying to meet your extremely high standards. Then check in regularly with these colleagues. Don't wait until you think the project is finished. Build in checkpoints where you share your progress at 50% or 80% done. Your boss or client just might tell you that the work is good enough at that point. You can also try small experiments where you relax your standards just slightly. What happened? Were your worst fears realized? Finally, consider how perfectionism impacts your relationships. Are you setting unrealistic standards for those around you? The need to have it perfect will often annoy others and, in extreme cases, drive them away. For their sake and yours, learn to be satisfied with good enough. Guys, we're going to talk about good enough a little bit later in the presentation, but I do want to address a couple of small things in here. When they talk about the fact that aiming for perfection could cause you to blow deadlines and annoy your colleagues, that's something that's very real in our industry. If we're expecting perfection out of our staffs, it's going to be really, really difficult to ever encourage them and support them. We need to set markers. We need to set reachable steps, reachable standards, not perfection, especially if they're out there on their cruise. You might have guys that haven't been with you for very long and are learning the industry. We can't expect perfection. Now, I'll give you a little story. A client I was working with years ago was a guy who was trying to transition from being a small mom and pop operation where he was out on every lead and every call and did the marketing and did all the work himself. And he was trying to transition from owner operator to owner manager. So he asked me to help him with that because that's one of the things that I've been specializing on for the last few years here in the industry. And we put together a plan of action. Now, the problem is his standards for how he needed the work done was so incredibly high because he was used to doing it himself and he considered himself a perfectionist, that what should have taken 6 months ended up taking closer to 2 years to implement because he was never satisfied with what was going on the marketing, sales, and production sides of the business without him being the one doing it. He was allowing perfect to be the enemy of good. I used to say to him, you can never be more than a worker if you're not willing to accept less than perfect. And he would hem and haw about, well, my company's reputation is that, we are perfect because I'm always the one. And I said, okay, you're telling me through every statement you make that you cannot be an owner manager. You must be an owner operator. And that was a big psychological shift that he had to make. Now, I'm not saying he had to compromise his values. His values are still to provide that highest level of service. But he had to understand that there's a learning curve and there are steps in the process. And he couldn't allow himself to force perfect to be the enemy of good in his case because it was going to keep him on a truck forever. Same thing applies in the reverse for workers. If your marketers are out there or if your workers are out there and they feel like they're being driven to perfection every day, and what they're doing, even though it's better than yesterday, is not good enough, then you're going to create a defeatist attitude within your staffs and you're going to have a lot of turnover. And the last thing that we want as a company that wants stability and growth is turnover. We spend a lot of time and effort and money investing into our teams, and turnover upsets that apple cart. We need to make sure that we can argue and support stability, The only way to do that is to eliminate the concept of perfection at the start, knowing that the next most important thing is to get better. I saw this little catchphrase. I thought it would fit really well because getting better is not difficult. But I thought the catchphrase fit really well. It never gets easier. You just get better. We always sit there and say, well, they talk about elite athletes and they say the most elite athletes, when the game speeds up, it actually slows down in their eyes and they're able to see things that other people who get caught up in the panic don't. That's kind of what we're referring to here. In business, things don't get easier for us as we do them more often. We just get better at it. We have to accept that time, as long as we're instituting certain practices within our industry and within our company, time is the thing that allows us to get better. So instead of seeking perfection, let's seek to work every day at improving each part of our process, and then good things will happen. It's a really important psychological aspect of the business. We don't spend a lot of time talking psychology. I did do a webinar last month on the psychology, the 80-20 rule, but I wanted to make sure that I reinforced again simple thought processes, simple ways that we approach our day, our week, and our staffs can go a long way towards creating this atmosphere of getting better, getting yourselves closer to the bullseye. There are things we can do to get ourselves towards the path of success. They're not listed in exact order on this staircase, but these are 4 things that we have to be employing every day. For those of us who are owner-operators, we're not doing a lot of this because we're out there in the field. But for those of us who are owner-managers, a great many of us are not doing these as well because the problem is we're spending so much time putting out fires. We're spending so much time trying to just get through the day and quote unquote manage. We need to really invest time, effort, and commitment into these steps for our teams. We need to train. We need to instruct. We need to learn. We need to instill learning. Those 3 things are all interrelated. And then we need to practice them. The practice part is actually what we were referring to in the last slide about just doing it better than yesterday. Just keep going out and doing it better. If your guys are at a 6, you can't expect them to get to a 10 tomorrow, but you want to try to shoot for a 7 tomorrow. Once they're at a 7, then you shoot for an 8 the next time. It's really going to be upsetting to shoot for perfection, but we have to shoot for better. We have to keep getting incrementally better. I want you to follow these simple steps for success going forward. And we're going to break down each step of the process, and I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible. And if you're doing it already, that's great. You should be doing it better each day. If you're not doing it yet, this is where you want to start. I'm going to give you your base for where you're going to start with each one of these steps. The first step, obviously, is when we get the call. Now, I am not denigrating or short shrifting anything that Dick Wagner does on the marketing side. What I'm specifically talking about here is the water damage project itself. So that starts at the incoming call. Just wanted to put that out there just in case some of you are going to run to Dick's defense and say, hey, it starts with the marketing. I understand that everything starts with marketing. I'm referring to that quote unquote perfect water damage job. So it starts with the call. You need to follow these steps. You need to have a simple script that everyone in the company follows. Optimally, there's one person who takes all the incoming calls and is able to be the one who fields all of your leads. If not, you have to make sure that everybody and anybody who is going to be answering the phone has a simple script to follow. Obviously, you need to do certain things. You need to get all the information up front. Don't leave anything to chance. Name, address, telephone number. There's a way to do that where you could say, just in case we get disconnected, can you give me that information? You want to get that information first. You don't want the homeowner to be on the line with you and to be hemming and hawing, and then you're getting into a desperation mode. It's all about controlling the conversation. So make sure you get the information up front. What type of loss is this? How long has the leak been going on? What do you see? You want to create a sense of importance on the call. You don't want to blow them off by saying things like, oh, it's no big deal. Don't sweat it. This is what we do every day. We want to make sure we set an expectation of value up front. I'm going to talk a little deeper than just simplistic, but this simplistic sense of creating a sense of importance ends up helping now, and it also ends up helping at the very end of the call. Think to yourself, how many times have you done the work, submitted your invoice, the insurance company releases the money to the homeowner, and then you get into a Monty Hall, let's make a deal with the homeowner about how much they want to give you? Obviously, if the insurance company agreed with your invoice and paid your invoice by issuing a check to the homeowner, you have the rightful position of saying, you have to give me all the money. But the homeowner sits there and says, well, what did you do? You came here, you sucked up some water, you cut a couple of pieces of drywall out, and you left some equipment. How could that be worth $5,000? Well, you know where that comes from in their head? That comes from this part. On the very first couple of minutes of that call, you didn't create a sense of importance or a sense of value. There are ways that we can word this. I worded it before. Oh, that's no big deal. We handle that all the time. We've now lowered the homeowner's expectations of how serious their issue is. Okay? To us, a $5,000 water job might be normal and no big deal. But to a homeowner who's never experienced this before, $5,000 is a hell of a lot of money. So it's all about perspective. We need to make sure that we say things like, we understand how serious this is for you. We want to make sure that we can take care of you, and we want to put you at ease. So we're going to make sure that we're going to get out there right away. Let them know you're on your way. Don't turn this into a, well, what is your price? What do you think this is going to cost me? I'm going to call some other people. Once it gets into that, you've lost the sense of urgency. You've lost a sense of importance. So now you're also losing that ability to show value, to build value in your service. Homeowners understand every time they call a plumber or an electrician out to the house, they're going to have to pay for that. Even if the guy's just going to come out and take a look at something, they're paying for that service call. Why is it that so many of us have plastered all over our websites free estimates, free inspections? Why do we do that, guys? We're doing that because in our own minds, we think that our services aren't valued similarly to these other professionals. We need to get away from that. We need to, on the call, start creating this value proposition. Yes, this is serious. Yes, this isn't something you should be doing by yourself. And yes, this is something that we are going to help you with. If we do that, it helps not only on the call, it helps when we show up. It also helps when we invoice. Hope everybody understands the significance. If you're not currently doing this, give me a call, send me an email. I can give you some really good, simple scripts to follow. Very, very simple processes to be able to set this value. Next step, obviously, is we show up. First impressions matter. Is this how we respond to most of our losses? Or is this how we respond? Do we come in guns a-blazing, fists full of equipment, ready to rip down the door and get started? I said we needed to create a sense of urgency on the call. When we show up, we need to create a sense of calm, and we need to create a sense of professionalism. So obviously the person taking the call serves one purpose, and our first responder or our salesman serves a completely different purpose. They are our first faces that the homeowner sees. We need to put them at ease. We need to show our professionalism. So obviously, if you look at the gentleman on the left, he's dressed appropriately. He's got a name tag around his neck that clearly shows he's a professional, and he's got identification. He's dressed cleanly. He's not barging into the homeowner. He's respecting the homeowner's, obviously, desires to meet outside and discuss. There are ways that we can, again, train your staffs on this approach. You're always asking permission to enter. You're always thanking them for allowing you into their home. and you're always addressing them very professionally. Okay. There are great resources out there in the industry for people who do nothing else but train on this part of the process. If anybody's interested, please reach out to me and I can give you names and I can give you resource information on specifics about this part of the process. But you need to understand that these first impressions do matter. Is the truck clean? Is your individual clean? Is their clothing clean? Is your paperwork very simple and straightforward? We're going to talk about this now. Many of us have contracts that, I got to be honest with you, if you showed it to me, I wouldn't sign it. And I'm in the industry and I know all about what the contract says. I wouldn't sign it because it's very legalese. The best lawyers who write contracts for restoration companies make sure that there's no more than 2 pages of writing on those contracts. I can't tell you how many times I've reviewed contracts for some of our clients, and they are 4 and 5 and 6 pages long, and there's all sorts of restrictions and legal language that all it does is confuse and scare the homeowner. Yes, we can put language in there that's simple and straightforward that still protects us, that still obligates the homeowner. But we can avoid making it so that there's so much fine print that it scares the clients. We need to make that difference. We need to understand that there is a differentiation between a contract that is mutually binding and supportive and a contract that scares them. Don't put a ton of legal information in there. Make it simple. Again, the Crest Network has multiple legal resources for you. Remember, every state has different rules about what needs to be in contracts or work authorizations. So obviously, even if we refer you to a lawyer, they might be able to put a template together. But ultimately, if they are not licensed in the state that your company is working in, you're going to need to make sure you refer to your local attorney. But we have resources where you can do this at a fraction of the cost of going out and doing it yourself. And you can make sure that you're getting somebody who's a restoration attorney, first and foremost. Step 3, once we've answered the call and we've responded to the home, it's do the work. Again, we have 3 important steps here that we need to make sure. First, before we send anybody out, we need to educate and train our teams. Are we going to get them to perfection? No, we're not. Only that 4th step in the process, which was practice, is going to get them closer to perfection. But before we put them out there, we certainly don't want to hire them on Monday and send them out there Monday morning and expect them to give us anything further than a 0. We need to make sure we educate and train our teams. We need to make sure that we're following up and we're inspecting the work. We're looking at the finished product after they've done with their demo and they're done with their cleaning and they've set their equipment. The photo on the left is a perfect time to have someone go back and take a look. Are those flood cuts good? Did they clean in the cavities? Is the equipment set up properly? Are there trip hazards, things like that? Any of us looking at that picture, if we blew it up, we could find a couple of issues with this particular job. This is not a 10 by any means. The picture on the right with the mat systems is not a 10 by any means, but we're getting closer. It certainly looks better than a lot of the pictures that we have seen all over the internet. That's for sure. But it's a very important second step. Always verify the work. Always inspect it, because you can't be critical and you can't be judgmental about the work unless you've actually seen the work. And the only way to continue to train and educate is to see the mistakes and correct them. That's how we get better tomorrow, by doing this today. Finally, this is something that's always forgotten by owners, and it can't ever be forgotten. We need to reward effort. Now, I have a dollar sign there, and that's just a cheap way of saying that we need to make sure that we reward effort. We can't throw guys out there expecting them to do the work for us and not let them at least understand that we appreciate their efforts. We have to get out there and we have to work hard. We have to make sure that when they are working hard, we understand that and we reward their efforts. Those are simple steps for how to handle the progress. Finally, step 4 is we need to get paid. Nothing matters in those first 3 steps if we can't get paid. So one of the ways to make it easier to get paid is to have a simple contract. The easiest way to get paid is to have a simple invoice. Many of us want to show how brilliant we are by creating invoices that are so difficult to understand and so technically intense that all we do is confuse the adjuster or the third party, and they just take the easy route, which is, well, here's what I would pay and here's what you're going to get. And then we are forced to defend things that are really difficult to understand in the first place. Let's make it real simple. If you're using Xactimate, let's put simple sketches together. Let's make sure our lines are clearly defined. This example doesn't use many what we call F9s. There's not many notes written. There are no notes at all written underneath any of the line items. I recommend using a lot of explanatory F9 notes. Make sure that no matter what, you're adding an exact count and an exact amount. Where the air movers are, and it says 7 each, explain why. First of all, you have 2 lines of air movers in the same room, and explain what that means. Is it 7 and this is for Monday and this line number 21 is for Tuesday? Explain that. Go over the top, simplifying your invoice so that it is absolutely clear what you're billing for. The simpler your invoice is, the quicker you'll get paid, and the higher percentage of your invoice you'll get paid as well. Now, as someone who's spent the better portion of my 11 years on the invoicing side of the business and the coaching side as well, but the vast majority of my time has been spent helping with invoices, I could certainly tell you that the more in-depth an invoice is and the more difficult to understand it is, and the less proof you have, the lower percentage ultimately you're going to collect. So that is an exact science, but it's also something very simple that we can get better at each day. Look at your invoice and then give it to your spouse, or give it to your brother or sister, or give it to someone who doesn't understand the industry, and ask them if they could understand what you billed for just by reading it. If they can't, you need to put more information in there, because I'm sorry to tell you this, but a heck of a lot of the people who are reviewing our invoices today are at that level of understanding of our industry. Make it simple for them. I'm going to change track a little bit now that we went over how to get towards a more perfect invoice and a more perfect project. We know that that's just that Loch Ness monster that's somewhere out there, but nobody's ever seen it. So we need to understand we want to work towards perfection. But I also wanted to show you this. This is the Kubler-Ross curve. Now, for some of you who don't understand, when you talk about things like grief and loss, there's this curve and there's this psychological curve. Now, somebody took this and they aligned it with business change as opposed to life change. So, of course, you got denial, anger, bargaining, depression. Those are all the normal steps that we see when somebody goes through grief. Somebody loses a loved one. These are the things that you hear. Somebody loses their job. These are the things that happen. Somebody's going to get divorced. These are all steps in this process. Well, these have been applied to business. This is very important because as owners, we need to understand when we're asking our staffs to change and when we want to go from better to best or best to excellent, or God willing, from excellent to perfect, we're making changes to our systems, our processes. We're changing expectations. We need to understand that this curve, this mindset occurs in our staffs. How do we manage this, guys? We need to understand. So let's walk through this really quick. We've announced we're going to make some changes. The first thing that your guys are thinking is the denial step. Oh, they're not really going to go through with it. They think we're just pie in the sky or we're just dreaming. Like we say to ourselves, hey guys, Dick and I work with a client that's currently doing a good amount of water business, but they want to literally double their water business in the next 2 years. We've laid out a plan for them to double their water business in the next 2 years. It's not going to happen in 6 months, but in 2 years, we know they can do it. Based on the structures that they currently have in place, they're going to just need to be increasing some staff, but they need to make some process changes within the structure. So this client recently laid out that plan to their staff, and believe it or not, the staff came back and they all said, we don't really believe it's going to happen because he's been saying this for years. Okay? That happened. Well, that happened 3 months ago. Guess what's happening now? They're into step 2 right now. Everybody's sitting there saying, and they're literally saying it about us. What a waste of time and money. I can't believe they're spending so much time on Dick and Billy. Why would they spend all that time and money? We're doing perfectly fine the way we are. They will go from denying it. They'll be angry about that change. You're asking them to do so much more. You're nothing but a greedy, you know what, because you're already making plenty of money. What are you trying to get more out of us for? Okay. Then they're going to sit there and they're going to realize, well, they're becoming less motivated. They're being asked to do more, and they're just going to kind of rebel. So they're just going to sit there and say, well, if they want me to do it, fine, but I'm not going to have time to do anything else. Or if they're going to make me do it all, I'm just going to quit. So you see the way the curve aligns with the motivation and the performance. It really, really dips down right in that quote unquote bargaining phase, because that's when they're at their lowest psychological point. So we really have to push them. Obviously, in the next couple of months, they're going to come to the realization that, yeah, these changes are already in and we're starting to be demanded. So they're going to get really depressed. They're going to be like, oh my God, this is happening and I can't do anything about it. How many of us have ever suffered through that? We've all suffered through various phases here. We've all seen these activities with our staffs, or maybe we've even suffered through it ourselves. Did you equate the fact that it's one step of a process, or did you think it was just, oh, we just have this one guy and the one day he came in and was happy, the next day he was miserable? Well, you know what? Maybe he was going through those other phases and you just didn't uh, understand it, witness it, or it wasn't evident to you. So understand that a lot of what's going on right now is we're going to have to be a little alert, and we're going to have to be more in tune with what's going on and more communicative with our teams. Finally, their attitude will get a little better as you get closer towards the implementation of everything, and the results start going from better to best, or from best to excellent. You're going to get somebody who says, well, this is how it is, but and things aren't so terrible. And then finally, when things are really working well for the company and for the staff member, they're going to sit there and go, well, you know what? If I have to be honest, things are better now than they were before. So this was a good move. That doesn't mean that the next move, they're going to stay on that moving up, moving on slope and keep elevating. They're going to start all over again, just at a higher level. That denial is going to come right back in when you start to change it. So you need to understand, you have to address these within your teams. Dick and I spend a lot of time working on this, and I always have used the phrase with a lot of our clients that we have to be upfront with our team members when we're instituting change. And one of the first things I tell them is, the best phrase to use is, here's where we want to get to, but in the interim, it's going to get worse before it gets better. If your worker feels like he's a little overwhelmed now, he's going to be a lot overwhelmed. But when it finally gets better, he's going to have overall less work than what he's doing now, because the process is actually going to get better. And his productivity is going to go up. His time management is going to go up. Those are the things that we instill. But both Dick and I always tell everybody, it's going to get worse for you before it gets better. So we're trying to set expectations so that when we go from denial through bargaining into acceptance, that dip is a minimal dip, right? We've heard the expression over the last 9-10 months when it refers to COVID, where they were making great adjustments in order to flatten the curve. Well, that's what we're also trying to do. Understand that our ability to communicate and anticipate is going to help us flatten our own curve. Finally, I want to talk about the topic of good enough, because we talked earlier in the presentation about good enough, that we had the phrase, the need to have it perfect will often annoy others, and in extreme cases drive them away. For their sake and yours, learn to be satisfied with good enough. That came out of the Harvard Business Review. We need to be able to say to ourselves, when is good enough good enough? The best way I can talk about this is to talk about that good enough is how I like to judge an individual's contributions, but I don't like to judge the overall company's status as good enough. If you look at the chart, it's a very, very simplistic chart, but because I'm a math guy, this simply but accurately represents what they call the law of diminishing returns. That as effort increases, there is a very, very great increase in value received from that effort. At some point, though, for every single individual, whether it's a worker or an owner, the insistence on more and more effort will result in a diminished value or a diminished return, to the point where you can actually have them giving you zero value with an incredible amount of effort. So we need to understand when good enough is good enough doesn't necessarily have to apply to a company. It applies to each individual. And if we can become really well or really good at assessing where each person's star is in their value effort matrix, we can make a company that is striving towards perfection. There's a movie that was out 20 years ago called Remember the Titans. Great movie, and there's a lot of very, very good quotes. It's a good motivational movie. A lot of things happen in the movie. But for those who have never seen it, it's about a high school football team back in the late 60s, early 70s in the Washington, D.C. area that was being forced to integrate back when the equal rights laws were being instituted from state to state. And there was a lot of backlash within the community, which was a predominantly white community that they were integrating. But the football team was fully integrated with both African Americans and whites and others. And they named a black man as head coach. And all through the year, they knew that if they lost one game, the coach would be fired. That was the kind of pressure that was being put on by the school board, who was forced to hire him. Well, to make a very long story short, they go undefeated until the very last game of the year. And the coach has been driving them for perfection, It's not good enough just to do it well. You have to do it perfect. And he's on them, and terribly on them. Well, they get to the last game of the year, and they're playing an incredibly powerful team, and they're losing at halftime, and the coach just sees that this probably isn't going to go the way they want to go. And he says to them, it's okay, guys. Your best is good enough. And he's come to the realization that he may have driven them past that point of diminishing returns. And he has admitted that each one of them is doing their best, so their best is good enough. And he uses the expression good enough. Well, one of the players stands up, one of the captains stands up and says, with all due respect, coach, I don't think you're right. He said, none of us are perfect. All of us might be good enough, but together we are perfect up to this point. We as a team are perfect. So he is re-emphasizing the idea that I'm trying to get across, that no one of our workers is ever going to be perfect. No one in our lives is ever going to be perfect. But as long as we strive and accept good enough and strive towards it, the combined efforts of everyone can lean towards perfection. I know that's a very long-winded way of getting around to telling you that don't look for the perfect job. Don't look for the perfect worker. Look for someone who's good, willing to get better tomorrow. So good enough is good enough when you know that their effort is giving you their maximum value. Not everybody could be a chief. Not everybody could play quarterback for an NFL team. But if their efforts are giving you the maximum value for them, that's good enough. That point is good enough, because then your company will be operating on its highest standard, and you will be better than yesterday. And that's really all it's about. Perfection will never arrive for you. The striving towards perfection can arrive for you if you're willing to accept better tomorrow than today. Guys, on behalf of Dick Wagner, I really want to thank you for joining us today. And I want to encourage you to keep joining us each week as we share our knowledge, our experiences, and some great tips on marketing, on production, on sales, on different administrative topics. Guys, the Crest Network's been doing this now for 1 full year, and it's really been our honor and our pleasure. And we want to thank you so much for being such loyal followers. We want to encourage you, if you've missed any of our previous webinars, go to the Crest website, thecrestnetwork.com. Join us. Take a look at some of those. We've got scores of the weekly webinars. We've got hundreds of videos for you. We've got an incredible amount of resources. Please reach out to Dick or myself on the phone number right here. We'll be glad to direct you. And if you're not a Crest member, we encourage you, talk to a Crest member, see what value they're getting. Give us a call. Let us know what interests you have and see if there's a way that we can help you to strive towards being a more perfect company. I want to thank you very much. This is Bill Giannone. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.